What's up, guys? So, this is a hip routine that can be done a couple of times a week, and it's basically all about mobilizing our hip joint. Okay, so the best way to do this, guys, is also barefoot. It'll just make the whole routine a little bit easier, and you'll feel more connected with the floor, and it'll just help wake up your feet as well. Okay, so starting off, guys, this first rep this first exercise, I'm standing with my left foot planted on the floor, and basically what I'm doing, guys, is I'm rotating right around, looking behind me, but I'm concentrating on opening and closing my hip as much as I can, in kind of like a horizontal direction. So I'm rotating right around with a straight leg, looking right behind me, conscious of getting that rotation into my hip, and I'm taking a brief stop then halfway around just to make sure I don't get too dizzy. So turning right around as far as I can, and like touch the floor for a split second to keep my balance, and then rotating as back as far as I can the other way, looking at the back wall behind me in both directions, and all the while I'm concentrating on what's happening in my hip joint, trying to get a good stretch in my hip. That's what I'm looking for in this position, and you can do this 10 reps per leg or more if it feels good. Okay, guys, the next stretch then is called the 90-90 stretch, and we're going to do a few different movements in this position. Okay, so this is what that 90-degree position looks like, and before we start off, just get into this position, spend a bit of time in this position just to get a feel for it. Make sure your hips don't cramp, because this is going to feel really strange if you haven't done it before. Your hips will be freaking out a little bit, and you might have to relax out of it, and that's totally fine. So spend about 30 or 40 seconds in this position starting off before you actually do any of the movements. Another thing to note as well, guys, is if I'm struggling to keep my torso upright, I'm using my hands to support my body. But if you can do it without keeping your hands on your leg, go for it. Okay, so the first move we're going to do in this 90-90 position, guys, is just going to be leaning over. Okay, so I have both hands on the floor, and I'm leaning over in 3 different positions. So first of all, I'm leaning over my knee, then I'm leaning over the middle of my shin, and then I'm leaning over my foot. So do 3 to 5 reps of this, guys, starting off. Over your knee, over your shin, and over your foot. Try and keep your back relatively straight, not like a massive curve in your back. You want to try and hinge from your hips as much as possible doing this. The next step then, guys, is I'm going to reach forward with one hand. So reaching forward with one hand like this will help me lean over a little bit more, and I want you to actively reach for something or a point in front of you instead of just leaning over with your arm out. Reaching like this will make a big difference when you actually kind of move towards something, an object, or a certain direction. And then the third variation of this, guys, is basically me leaning forward with both hands off the ground. So I'll reach as far forward as I can with both hands, and then in between reps I will grab my leg just to kind of help support my torso and just orientate myself again a little bit. If you are flexible and mobile in this position and you don't need to grab your foot, try this keeping your hands off your body the whole time to make it harder again. Okay, guys, the final variation of this movement then is the same thing with your torso and arms. You're reaching as far forward as you can, but you're going to lift your back leg off the ground. So this is going to make it even more difficult, and this might cause your hip to cramp a little bit, but try your best anyway, guys, and with a little bit of practice you'll be surprised at the difference from when you first try this to a few reps in, or a few goes in, or a few days in. You get much more mobile and much more comfortable in these positions. So again, you're just trying to lift your back leg as high as possible. You're concentrating on rotating from the hip. And then the last stretch, guys, or it's more of a movement, is basically I have my hands on my front leg just to keep my balance, but then I'm going to lift and rotate my back leg forward. So your leg doesn't have to be perfectly straight. It could be a little bend in your knee. It just depends on how tight your hamstring is for that. But if you want to make this harder again, keep both hands up off the ground, and it's just your leg you're using then to rotate around. Try 10 reps of everything. Okay, the last one then, guys, is basically in this position. What I'm trying to do is I'm lifting my knee as high as I can as I rotate, and I'm keeping my other leg pinned to the floor as much as possible. So your torso will rotate naturally, and you're just basically trying to lift your knee as high as you can. Some people will be able to get their knee right up in the air if they're nice and flexible and mobile, but if you're stiffer like me, you won't get it that high and you'll struggle a little bit. Okay guys, and then our third and final position that we're going to get into is the frog pose, or the frog stretch. So if you've done yoga before, you'll be familiar with this. Basically what's happening here is I'm spreading my legs as wide as possible, have roughly like a 90-degree bend in my knee starting off, and then I'm sitting back into this position again. And I feel a huge stretch in my groin and also feel some movement in my hip as well. So try and relax as much as you can and sit back into this position. And if you start to release a little bit and you can move your legs out a little bit more, go for that and sit back again. When you're in this position as well, guys, try and actively like push your knees out instead of just spreading your legs and sitting into it. Also try and push your knees out away as well. Try and spread your legs just to exercise a bit more strength and mobility in this position. Okay guys, and the last part of this then is we're doing some reps, and what we're doing is lifting our feet off the floor and moving forward and backwards. So I move forward, my feet come off the ground, and then my feet go back to the floor and I sit back into it again. And you can do anywhere from 10 to 12 or 15 reps doing this, and take your time. This will feel very strange in your hip joint at first, but you will get used to it as you get more mobile. And that's it guys. Just a general rule of thumb for stretching and doing your mobility work. If you sit on a chair for 4 hours a day, you should be spending about 4 minutes stretching and working on your mobility. So if you got like, it's basically the rule of thumb is a minute of stretching for every hour you're sitting. So if you're working in a 9 to 5, you're doing 8 hours at a desk, you should be doing at least 8 minutes of stretching and mobility work, working on your hips and stuff like that, to undo all that time spent sitting down. This should be something, guys, that is pretty much non-negotiable, like that should be done daily, just like brushing your teeth. You don't brush your teeth, 2 or 3 times a week, and you should approach your joints and mobility in the same way. It should be done daily as necessary instead of like 2 or 3 times a week. So just keep that in mind when you're working out.